Welcome to another exciting mystery solving video. In this one I'm going to solve the mystery of Gobekli Tepe and all the Tepe sites on the southeastern side of Turkey. So let's first have a look at the map to see where we're talking about here and what I'm talking about. This blue thing here, it's called planet Earth. If we zoom in, my other videos have been mostly on some sites around South America. This time we're going to come over here and take a look at the site on the southeastern side of Turkey. So here's Turkey over here. It's not far from Israel. If we zoom in, zoom, this whole southeastern side here we have, and there it is. Okay, so if we zoom all the way down, now you can see they've put some covers over it to shelter it from rain and whatever. This site has been dug up underground. If you have a look at the Google images, what is it? What is it all about? What this site is, what it's all about, it's telling us one single story, and that story is of Noah and his ark and the world being flooded and the saving of Noah's family and the saving of the animals. Now the site was dug up under this mound or mountain or hill or whatever you want to call it. Do you see how the pillars, or the T-shaped pillars, are all packed in because Noah and the animals were packed into the ark? On some of these pillars we not only see animals but we also see handbags. In 3 places in the Bible, in Genesis 6:21, God says 3 times, take food for yourselves, take food for the others, and take food for the animals. So 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and here we see 3 handbags. Now let me ask you, would you not take a handbag if you were going on a trip? Some of the other T-shaped pillars we see hands with 6 fingers, and this is because the giants were part of the problem why God had to flood the world and kill them all. You could also consider Noah and his family like giants because they gave birth to the new world. So thematically they were giants. Now why are the pillars T-shaped? Do you see how the pillars all have like a T-top shape? They are T-shaped. And the reason for that is because Noah's ark was T-shaped. God commanded the ark to be 30 by 50 by 300 long. There is to be an extra 1 cubit high ridge that would enclose the window. There was to be a window on top of the ark. So I've added a little window here. If you consider this 300 by 50 by 30, there is a thematic line it draws. But other thing I found interesting is that if you break down 300 by 50 by 30 into a ratio, you'll have 610.6. So that is 616. And there in Genesis 616, that is where God explains the dimensions. This one here has a window and there is a roof for an opening. The other thing I noticed is that the pillars are leaning forward like the shape of a 7. And there in Genesis 7:7, this is where God instructs Noah to go in. So Noah entered. In other words, he's leaning forward. When you calculate the volume of the ark itself, I get this figure here, 450,000 cubic cubits. And the extra piece on top calculates to 7,500. So that plus that is 457,500. The extra piece of 7,500, 75 is in relation to victory over Satan. 45 is in relation of God and man being parallel. See, 45 is a number that generates this very early Christian symbol of two lines. If one line is God and another straight parallel line is earth and man, you join them together so that man is in parallel with God. And that's what God wanted to do by flooding the world and killing all the rubbish. Now, the early symbol of this is this depiction here. And Hitler, who worked for Satan, rotated it 45 degrees and changed the direction, mocking God. The number 450 comes up 3 times in the Bible, and that's found in these 3 passages. It's the confrontation of idolatry, which all the people were doing. Now, Satan and Molech were out at the time, and they were like a plague on earth, just like Satan is today. So people were bowing down to Satan and Molech and killing each other and doing all these despicable things. And not only that, but men from heaven came down to earth to breed with human women. Maybe there's a shortage of women in heaven, I don't know, but they gave birth to babies that now had their DNA contaminated. If extraterrestrials come here and breed with humans, we will give birth to contaminated species that was not God's plan. God's plan for us is to be the way He made us from the beginning. Now, if you take a top view of this site, you see how the pillars, this is a top view, but at this stage, the pillars have not all been dug up. These are the enclosures around Gobekli Tempe. Now, there are 8 Tepe sites all over Gobekli. But to understand why the pillars are in the orientation and layout that they are in, first you need to understand Noah and his sons. Noah's first son was Japheth, then he had Shem, then he had Ham. Now Japheth and Ham are the clan members, and Shem gives birth to Abraham, Moses, King David, ultimately they're all the way down to Jesus. So Shem is the covenant people, and Japheth and Ham's sons and daughters become the clan members. And this is why, if you do your calculations, you'll find that the pillars, the central 2 pillars, the 2 big ones, they are Noah and his wife, and the ring of the other pillars are in numbers that represent the covenant, the clan, guardians, the creatures, etc. You can see at this site here, B, the closure B, at the moment, before it's all been dug up, there is, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's another 4 in an outer ring. So there's inner and outer rings. 11 is because Japheth's 7 and Ham's 4. 7 and 4 is 11. So here is an explanation on how and why they spread out into this. I really do wish I had an updated top view plan to show you. Then we would be able to demonstrate the exact numbers of the rings. But this image, the only image I can find online that's available to us, is a very early image before they put the shelter on top. But anyway, if you look at some of the other enclosures and the other Tepe sites in the region, like this one, Karahan, you can see there's 1 face, 4 and 6 and 1, making a total of 11. So each enclosure has a theme. These outer enclosures, there's not much there. There's very little there to see. They're basically platforms with centralized Noah and his wife, and they represent like a later echo of the 8 and an aftermath of the expansion of the family. However, these are the primary numbers in the story of Noah and his ark, the flooding of the world and the sons and daughters of his family. Now, unfortunately, most movies and TV shows that all tell you the story of Noah, the ark, and the great flood, they always end the story when Noah beaches the ship and they all get off the ark. But that is not the end of the story. So if we start off with the ark's dimensions, if you look at this tell, this mound that was over it, does it not look like an upside down boat? And you may say thematically, well, did God not turn the world upside down by flooding it? Now this tell is 300 meters in length and 30 cubits high, covering the 300 and the 30. And it also, 30 cubits high rounded is 15 meters. And the water depth above the mountains has a number of 15 in the Bible. The pillars also have a weight, and some of them weigh in at 8 tons exactly, representing the 8 people that were on the ark. If you have a close look at these pillars, the T-shaped pillars, you'll see that they're all on 3 different levels, which the ark itself had 3 decks or 3 stories. If we have a look at the number of animals, there was 7 clean animals and birds and 2 unclean animals. And it's captured in Genesis 7 verse 2, where it speaks of 7 pairs of every clean animal, 7 pairs of every kind of bird, 1 pair of every unclean animal. So we come down to this final measurement here of 7 and 2. Now, if you look at the earth from side view, with the North Pole, South Pole, and Gobekli Tempe on the circumference, and you draw a line to the North Pole, and you drop a line down to the center of the Earth, that section of the pie is exactly 1/7 of the Earth. And to the South Pole, it is exactly 2/7 of the Earth. Let's jump out of the presentation, go to the Google Earth view, just to show you what I mean. So what I want to do is I want to centralize the equator at top eye level view. Now there is Turkey. Let's zoom out a little bit. Now we're going to rotate to the side so that Gobekli Tempe is right on the edge, on the horizon. So we get like a tangential view. At the same time, the equator is straight. So we're looking straight down on the Earth. Now can you see? There it is there. So that portion of the Earth is exactly 1/7, and to the South Pole there is 2/7. Okay, now also 10143 has an Hebrew meaning of to lift up and save a vessel. If we have a look at the angles, the angle to the North Pole and to the center of the Earth is 63.6. Genesis 6:3. This is where God decides to limit the lifespan of man. Why? Because our blood was contaminated with the Nephilim, the offspring of some people from heaven that came here to breed with human woman. 636 is the Greek number for the phrase to sail away in a boat. Isn't that interesting? Now, if you go back, now Hebrew number 63 is wooden or beam or timber, and 636, the Hebrew number, is judgment, decisive judgment. All these other angles that's being produced, 528, 58 is the gematria number for the name of Noah. 528, the destruction of the mighty city. 37 is the water source, linking Genesis 2:6 and the making of the water of the world. The Hebrew number 37 is a holy remnant in the ark, which was Noah and his family. He was holy. So all these values, all these measurements, all these angles that we are measuring, all align perfectly with the story in the Bible of Noah and the ark. So these are Hebrew meanings, and these are Greek meanings. 52, the Greek meaning is ignorance, and the people were ignorant, and that's why God had to flood the world and kill them all. The distance between Gobekli Tempe and the North Pole is exactly 5,669 kilometers. 5669 is the Hebrew number to perish and destroy, destruction. That destruction is what God laid down on the earth by flooding the world. 1082, which is the measurement in royal cubits instead of kilometers, is the consumption of the wicked. And to the South Pole, 11411, the Hebrew number for 114 is restoring the earth to the state of judgment before the renewal of the covenant. 616, together. Now the animals were gathered into the ark. We have 4882 in the royal cubits, distance to the South Pole. That is destruction, ruin, corruption. And the world had become corrupt because of Satan, Molech, and all the evil people in the world. Now we have our next category here, which is the flood timeline. Now there was a duration of 40 days and 40 nights. It was the age of Noah when the flood began. He was 600. We have some other numbers here. Now, to do with the number of days the ark rested for on Ararat, somebody had measured a distance here between, so I included it here because it's 0.7 meters. And if you look at the measurement of Gobekli Tempe and you draw a line directly down to the equator, it is 4,000 kilometers, representing 40 days and nights that it rained for when they were in the ark. When you start measuring the distances between the pillar enclosures, we get to other numbers that all line up again with the flood timeline. So between F and D, D is the main Gobekli Tempe site with all the main pillars. These other little sites are 50 meters off and 100 meters off, drawing us to the 150 days that the waters prevailed for. And again, we have some further numbers. Noah's age at the birth of Shem, his second eldest, was 500 years old. Then Shem's age when the birth of his son, Arpachshad, was 100. We got these other values which can also be found. And Noah ended up living for 950 years. So he continued to live 350 years after the flood. Shem's lifespan was also 600 years. And some of the stone pillars are weighing in at 6 tons. To calculate the 950, if you take the sum of the distances to to between the Gobek and Mount Judy, you get to 2170. And if you divide that by the year that the flood happened, you get 950. Now, I'm going to get into the dating in a moment. If you sum up all the bearing angles, the forward bearing angles to Gobekli Tempe between all the other the other 7 Tepe sites in the southeast of Turkey, they all sum up to, I get 946. That could be rounded to 950 again. So there's several ways you can get to 950. Also, the tel circumference at the base is pi times 300, which is 942. Okay, let's look at the chronology. So there were 10 generations from Adam and Eve to Noah. 10 generations. Okay, here they all are. Now, if you calculate in the Bible, it does give you the number of years each one was before they had their son. So you can calculate, if you sum them all up and you include Noah's age at the time of the flood, you get to 1,656 years. Now, my own personal calculation of the date Adam and Eve was born is 3939 BC. That's my own personal. I don't want to get into how I came to that, but just take it from me that that's what I believe it is. And if you subtract 1,656 years, you get 2283. So I believe the year of the flood was 2283 BC, which you'll see why later things add up. Now, the site has been scientifically tested to be about, somewhere between 9,000 and 9,500 years old. If it's 9,283 years, then there is about exactly a 7,000 year difference between those two dates. And do you see how there's 7 has come up in other places, but you see how there's little 7 of these little look like ducks? So I believe the main T-stone that's depicting Noah. And sometimes off his belt you will see tools hanging on his belt. That's because Noah was a carpenter and he built the boat. Now here is just for interest's sake, I included here a full list of all the generations from Adam and Eve all the way down to King David. So you can see that there are 10 down to Noah and then another 10 to Abraham. So how do we get to 1,650 by means of measuring the site? Well, there's several different ways you can calculate this measure. Now, if you ask me how many days that Noah was on the ark for, how many days was the animals floating around on this ark, the boat? Well, that's quite interesting because if you calculate it, I get to 371 days exactly. If you add up the first 40 days, the 150 days times 2, because it took waters to prevail, the flood occurrence, the 7-day intervals of the raven and the 3 doves, you'll get to 371. So 372 was the first day, full day on dry land. Now, if you look at the number of degrees north that the whole site is at, it is at 37.2 degrees. Some of the sites are exactly 37.1 degrees north of the equator. That's the degrees latitude and longitude. So combined, you also get to 151. See that? So this slide maybe could have been before the other one. Sorry about that. But here is a thorough calculation of how we get to 371 from the Bible. We also have reverse bearing angles of 1,489 degrees. And Gematria 148 is victory. Here are some further alignments with our key numbers that when you measure the site and how they align to the story in the Bible of Noah and his ark. So these are the coordinates, and if you sum the degrees, you'll get again 75. So 75 has actually come up twice in the study. It's the arc volume. Also, you get the sum of the degrees, minutes, and seconds of the location where Gobekli Tempe is. So how does this add? Well, you get 187, 200, 169. Now, 200 was apparently the number of watchers in the story. That's only captured in the Quran. It's not captured in the Holy Bible. Nevertheless, the number does come up here. 187, the 187th verse, is the passage in the Bible, Genesis 8:3, where it speaks of the waters returning or beginning to recede. 75 also relates to Genesis 7:5, where it speaks of obedience. The Greek numbers for grace, flood, the ark, Noah, and 8, these numbers can also be found in the site as measurements. 58 comes up several times in the measurements between the sites and the bearing angles, and that is Gematria number for the name of Noah. And 78, flood. On the statue, we see this H. Do you see this H symbol that's on some of the pillars? Now, H is the Hebrew term for hey, which is breath, the breath of God, or behold, or restored life after judgment. And one of them has an HH, which is like a transition through judgment. That's the breath of God and what he does. So one H is the old world destroyed. The new H is a new post-flood world. Now, as I've explained, the numbers for Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are 58, 340, 48, and 490. Well, how do you find these numbers within the site? When you measure the bearing angles and distances, it's all explained here how you can measure. Like, for example, the Tel circumference is 0.58 miles in the measurements. So does 48. He has the elevation above sea level, 770 meters above sea level, and that is 0.48 miles. That's Ham's number. Japheth's number of 490 comes up in the royal cubits. It's also the number of hands. 50 meters is 492 hands. If you consider each enclosure where the pillars are located and you draw a line in between where the two pillars of Noah and his wife stand, you can get to these axis angles. So we have these axis angles of west of north and east-west axis. We can consider two axes here. Sum of the west of north offsets sum up to 55, and the sum of the east-west axes sum up to 327. Now, if you consider the west of north, you got 7 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees, and 23. So 23 degrees is exact 22.5 degrees is exactly 50 cubit angle width. The 15 degrees matches the 15 cubits directly. 10 matches the month where the tops of the mountains appear, the 10th month in Genesis 8:5. And the 7 matches the number of days of warning. The 5 can be considered double 5. 5 is the number of grace, God's grace. So 5 is a double grace. It leans into judgment and grace double. Now, we also have some measurements which align to the number 45, which is 50 minus 5. Now, that appears in the story of Abraham. Now, Abraham, later on, 10 generations after Noah, he wanted to save Lot. Now, when he does this, and he speaks to God. When Abraham speaks to God about saving Lot, he mentions that Lot is part of Abraham's clan from the descendants of Noah. So even all the way down this site of Gobekli Tempe is drawing alignments with. If we also consider the enclosure F at 22 degrees north of east, the feast and the New World axis. So we have 68 degrees to 22, which brings us down to this 55 and 22. Now 77 is a mercy number, and Noah's family was given mercy by God. Now there are many sculptures and features and sites around southeast of Turkey which all have this birthing depictions, like women having babies, and this one here where he's got his birthing tools out and all this. So let's now take a look at the animals on the pillars. Now what I found is that if you're a farmer, you'll know more about this than me. But in farming, there is what's known as a 12 husbandry checklist. And this is what a farmer does to determine whether he can farm an animal. And to determine that, you need to first identify the species, determine the dietary and feeding needs of the animal, the watering needs, the climate and temperature that it requires, shelter, the spaces and the barriers between other animals, the social structures and how they behave with other animals, behavioral enrichment to make them happy, reproduction and seasoning. They need to breed in the right climates, their health and keep them away from disease and sickness, their handling and endangerment, and their predator threat management. Now what you'll find is that these pillars have animals that represent different husbandry features. Like, for example, some of the central pillars have snakes and rams around enclosure A. So they have this ectotherm predator versus herd ungulate category. Enclosure B has a fox and a boar, 3 dogs. So they come down to a husbandry of canid hunting and behavior with the dog and the boar. There's a hunting scene. Then we have enclosure C, which keeps the boar and the ducks and the fox. So that brings us into a boar dominance is rooting omnivore plus social sounder and high impact ground behavior. Then enclosure D has a vulture stone, and also a headless human. And enclosure D also has a snake and oroches. So enclosure D has a bird dominance with flight, perch, and spaces, and dietary specialization. In other words, scavenger versus waterfowl and crane. Enclosure H has a big cat, then it has 2 snakes, it has the ducks and the crane, and the bird of prey grasping the snake. So all these features boil down to, for enclosure H. So this is a care and management profile. Now let's consider the woman in the ark, because it wasn't just Noah and his sons, but there were also 4 women. Now in Hebrew, the wife of Noah is 859. 859 can be calculated by taking the core distance to the equator of 4061 and subtracting the arc minutes of the Gobekli bearing of 82 degrees to Ayala, which is another one of the 7 or a total of 8 Gobekli Tepe sites. So we got 82, which converts to 4920 arc minutes. 4920 minus 4061 is 859, bang on. So here are calculations to each of the women that were on the ark. Now if you had to say how many women did Noah's family give birth to, there is this calculation of 6 people and their 14 doublings, and if you calculate it, you get to about a total of, between men and women, 98,000, and if you divide by 2, so you get to 49,000. 49,000 can be measured if you measure the distances in kilometers between each of the Tepe sites to Gobekli Tempe. You can sum them up to 47,000 kilometers, and if you add the bearing angles of all the sites to Gobekli to each, so in other words the reverse bearing, you get to exactly 49,420. And if you subtract the 7 degree offset, 7 times 60 in arc minutes, there you get 420. 49,000 minus 420 is 49,000 exactly. Look at that. Now, in Hebrew, the Hebrew number for Noah's wife is actually 165, which is Mzara. Mzara was Noah's wife, or Nama. Don't know how to pronounce that, but it calculates to 165, and you can find 165 in the reverse direction bearing angle between enclosure C and the main site of Gobekli. So 165 degrees is the east of south bearing angle between enclosure C. There are some other numbers, Greek numbers, which match the word flood, ark, and Noah, which is G 2627, 2787, and 3575. And each of these numbers can be calculated from the site using bearing angles, the distances, the elevation above sea level. You can find these exact numbers. Now let's consider Mount Judy, Gobekli Tempe, and Mount Ararat. The Holy Bible explains that Mount Ararat is the place where the ark rested. And according to my calculations, Mount Judy is the place where Noah built the ark. And Mount Ararat is the place where the ark rested. Now, the bearing angle, 57.9, you see 58, Noah's number. So Gobekli to Mount Ararat lines up with Genesis 8:4. From Mount Judy to Mount Ararat is 61,441 rods. That matches 614, where God instructs Noah, make thee an ark. Now we got Gobekli Tempe to Mount Judy, and we got some measurements here of 85.7 degrees. Genesis 8:6-7, this is where Noah opens the window and sends the raven out to find dry land. We can also calculate the total colatitudes, which sums up to 1,440 degrees. Now in 1 Corinthians 14 verse 40, decently and in order. So do you see how other chapters and verses in the Bible that match the theme of flooding the world, ridding the world of corruption, etc. And they can all be measured and found. So 1440 fits the claim of deliberation and structure. 5109 is about the flood and the waters. 422 is again the flood and the waters, all thy waves and thy billows, in Psalm 42 verse 7. 1969 matches Psalm 69, where it speaks of waters deep and flows over me. Again, if we look at some measurements and we align them to the flood story and the distances, the distance from Gobekli Tempe to Mount Judy is exactly 303.4 kilometers. The Hebrew term for 303 is a divine command, and that number 303 in Hebrew is, and he said, build me an ark. 603 is children of Israel. And 33 is the number of promise and covenant. So when God makes a covenant, promises man, he doesn't let him down. He makes sure it happens. So this is Mount Ararat. So somewhere around here, I believe the ark came to rest. And I wonder why they have not been able to find it. It is interesting. I wonder if somebody didn't destroy it. Satan would have found it and destroyed it if he had the opportunity. Because he likes to destroy everything, all the proof that we have of God and our knowledge of God. He wants to destroy it because he hates God. He just doesn't want to tell us. He's a lying little sneak that sneaks behind your back and doesn't tell you the truth. Here are some distances from Mount Ararat to Gobekli Tempe, which is 108,000 if you measure it in rods. 108 is the Hebrew number for the waters of Noah. Look at that. So here are the Tepe sites. Gobekli Tempe is one of these here. And this is Mount Ararat. Mount Judy's down here somewhere. This is Mount Judy. And these are the sites. So 108 is the waters of Noah. I found that very interesting. 303, and he said. 543, I am. And 86, the bearing to Judy is 86 degrees. 86 comes up in the study several times, like 58 does. And 86 is Elohim, God's name. And God did play a big part of the story here. So I'm not surprised to find it. Okay, finally we have some star alignments. Now, if we measure the declination to several stars from this site of Mount Judy, Mount Ararat, and Mount Judy to Mount Ararat, we get these declination angles. In studying the stars, I don't want to solve the mystery of stars right now, but I just wanted to share this with you because I thought it was kind of relevant. Now, some people in the world think that things on Earth are aligned with the stars. It's not true. The stars are part of the feature. And to show you what I'm talking about is that if you measure like this star Deneb is one of the primary stars that are aligning with this site of Gobekli Tempe. Now, Deneb is 1,500 light years from Earth. So that matches the 150 days for the waters to recede times 10, God's law. So what is it saying? It's saying a judgment measured degree. There is also a luminosity of Deneb, 196, which leads us to the 196th passage in the Bible, which is Genesis 8:12. And that speaks of the dove does not return. Then we have a latitude declination of 806 degrees, again matching Genesis 8:6, where Noah opens the window of the ark. Then we have a declination of 49 minutes is 7 sevens. So again we have the two 7-7 windows. The dove takes 7 days to return. The first dove, the seven dove, takes another 7 days to return. Procyon is another star, and again when we measure the distance of that star to Earth and how many years it takes for light for us to receive, we get to similar numbers like the 75 obedience, the 117 Noah prepared the ark, and there are two other stars which I've included here, and when you take their measurements you find again it comes down to the alignment with the 7-day warning and the rain decree and obedience. And we also have some alignments here with Psalm 42 with the waves and the billows, and then we have a 32 which is the hiding place, preservation. The ark was the hiding place and the preservation place. So finally I run the BTI test to see what score I get for this study. Now these are all the documents. These are quite large documents. This is the documents that I have used to create this presentation, which is a nice short one this time. It's probably the shortest video I've ever made. And I get the number 61 point something. I rounded it up to 62. which is interesting because 62 is the number of judgment. Now, I'm quite surprised to get such a low score, actually. And one of the reasons I'm getting a low score is because the study material doesn't have anything to go back and check it against. Because, like I said earlier, the archaeologists, they're just not giving you on their websites the information you need. What you need is a pillar count, the ring diameters. And they don't include that. They don't even include the bearing angles between the site locations. See these enclosures? They don't give you any of this. I've had to find this, measure this myself, which has been extremely difficult. So, on that note, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.